Welcome, everybody. We are so glad that you're joining us today for a really important conversation about U.S. arms sales and militarism of the Middle East, with a specific focus on Yemen and Israel-Palestine. We're joined today by two global experts on Middle East policy, Aisha Juman from the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, and Aya Ziada from Americans for Justice in Palestine. They're going to help us understand the geopolitical context and some opportunities for U.S.-focused advocacy. We're going to start the conversation talking about Yemen. Yemen now is home to one of the world's worst humanitarian crises on the planet. For over 8 years, the United States has been a party to the conflict as it supplied tens of billions in weapons and military aid to the Saudi-led coalition. This U.S. aid helped Saudi Arabia sustain its air and sea blockade and has been a primary driver of the humanitarian crisis. 60% of the deaths during the war have been caused by disruptions to food and medicine access. And last year, GAO released a report that the United States has supplied the Saudi and the UAE coalition roughly 60 billion in weapon sales since 2015 and the start of the Saudi coalition bombing of Yemen. Even though there are some signs of diplomatic progress between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis, the crisis is still desperate, and there's no formal mechanism preventing more U.S. military support for Saudi bombings should hostilities resume. And to help us understand the situation in Yemen and how U.S. weapons have been used in gross violations of human rights, I'd like to welcome my good friend, Aisha Juman. She's the founder and president of Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation and has over 30 years of experience in public health advocacy, including viral vaccine preventable diseases, cervical and breast cancer research, surveillance, maternal health, child health, nutrition, primary health care, and women in development. Aisha, would love to hear some remarks from you.
Thank you, Hassan. I'm honored to be with everyone here. I prepared a short presentation because I'd like people to see pictures of what I'm going to be presenting. Today, I'm going to be presenting about a bombing that occurred in an area in Yemen called Dahyan in Sada. It actually was an absolute massacre, and it occurred in August 9, 2018. But I wanted to start with this picture. This is a young Yemeni man who is 15. In 2012, he won an award for an invention from NASA in which he developed a car that's solar powered and can flip and become a boat. And he was invited to NASA where he got his award. And this is in a TED Talk in Sana'a. Unfortunately, in 2015, when the Saudi-led coalition started bombing Yemen, he was attending a wedding in his town, and the Saudi bombed that wedding. About 43 people died in that wedding. 15 of them are children. And Abdullah was severely burned, and this is his picture in Jordan for treatment. Before any presentation I give, I always like to show the beauty of Yemen because we hear a lot of heartbreaking stories from Yemen. This is Sana'a, the capital of Yemen. It's the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. It is a UNESCO heritage site, but it also want to show that Yemen has a very rich history and culture that should not be discounted as we hear stories from Yemen. This slide shows the daily attacks for 7 years by the Saudi-led coalition from 2016 up to 2022. And we see a lot of the red line is the military target, and the black line are the civilian targets. And we see that we've been a lot of civilian targets, including homes, including farms, including weddings, hospitals, you name it. So if we look at the impact of the war on children in Yemen, we've seen since 2015, about 11,000 Yemeni children have been killed or injured, and over 11 million children, 4 out of every 5 children, need humanitarian assistance. About 500,000 of them suffer from acute malnutrition, and over 2 million children are out of school. Cognitive development and malnutrition is going to be something that Yemeni will have to deal with for a very long time, because kids who have chronic malnutrition will not develop cognitively in an appropriate way. And finally, another thing that we have to contend with for a long time is mental health and PTSD. This just shows the US weapons sale to Saudi Arabia in 2015. Hassan said about 60 billion. So 2015, when they started the war in Yemen, that year alone, it was about 21 billion. Unfortunately, the Saudi purchase of weapons from the US had spanned 3 presidents. It started with President Obama, then Trump, and now President Biden. And this is something that just came out more recently in August 2022, where US approves massive arms sale to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Both countries are bombing Yemen and are also holding Yemen hostage to a blockade. This is something that just came out yesterday, the 24th of this month. Saudi Arabia rejoins world top 5 military spenders as they spend 75 billion just in 2022. And Saudi Arabia is not at war with any country, and it uses all its military might on the Yemeni people. This is the picture of the kids that I told you about. They were children who were on a trip. It was the summer. They were going on a trip in Dahyan when they're hit by a Saudi airstrike. This is Mukhtar, says all the 50 kids on board the bus that morning appeared to be in high spirit before the Saudi airstrikes. Yemen bus massacre, how a joyful excursion ended in a sheer terror. So this is again Osama, one of the kids. He was, I'm filming, and can be heard yelling. One of the videos surrounded by the children wearing coats over their thobes, a traditional Arab garment. And we will see here the UNICEF bags that they had given the kids for the excursion that they're having. And this is the school bus that was targeted. This is one of the fathers talking about his child. He said, I didn't find any of him, not his finger, not his bone, not his skull, nothing. This is another eyewitness. Human remains were thrown everywhere, mixed with debris from the explosion. I took as many children as I could to the hospital, but it was 14 kilometers away. This is from Al Jazeera. Again, a father talking about his child. He's saying, my child was really hurt. And the psychological impact on this child, that he said, we're trying to comfort him, but we can't stop sobbing with him. Okay. This is another one. I don't want to go anywhere near a bus. I hate buses. I hate school, and I can't sleep. This is one of the kids who was on a bus who survived the attack. And where did the material that was used to bomb the bus? It's a US made. This is the fragment of the MK-82 bomb were found close to the wreckage, and this is a US made bomb. A few days later, Al Jazeera received an image suggesting US made MK-82 bomb was used in the air raid. A metal fin bearing the serial number of Lockheed Martin was found nearby. The Trump administration, when they heard about that, they said they cannot be responsible, because when they sell weapon, it's not their responsibility how those weapons are used. 44 small graves stir questions about US policy in Yemen. And this is a father who 2 of his kids were killed in the bus. his name is Zaid al-Humran, visits the graveyard of his two boys. And this is from Human Rights Watch: coalition bus bombing, apparent war crime, and the US is complicit in this. And this is an opinion piece by the editorial board of Washington Post in the US support for this misbegotten and unwinnable war. Thank you very much for listening.
Aisha, thank you so much. That is absolutely heartbreaking hearing you speak about their stories. And it's just horrific what has happened in Yemen, and to know that US taxpayer dollars make our entire country complicit. And we need action. And I'm wondering if you had maybe some thoughts about ways, instead of selling weapons, what can the United States do? I think you might be on mute. Apologies.
Yeah, the first thing that the US can do is first stop supporting the Saudi-led war on Yemen. We know that Bernie Sanders tried to introduce the Yemen War Power Resolution in December of last year, but the Biden administration asked him not to. So that is something that we need to start. They also need to support the peace negotiation that is going on right now between the Saudis and the Sana'a government, the Houthis, instead of trying to derail it. That is something that is extremely important for us as a government to support. I would also like to ask the people on the call today to call their representatives and call their senators and ask them to support a letter that Rashida Tlaib had written to the Biden administration to support this peace process, to end US support for the war in Yemen, and to also increase funding for the humanitarian response in Yemen.
Thank you so much, Aisha, for all your great work, your advocacy. You truly are a global expert on this, and thank you so much for all that you've done for the years, and really have educated so many Americans about what's going on, and that's so invaluable. With that, I'd love to shift the conversation to Aya Zayada. She is another incredible expert and friend, and she's going to talk to us a little bit more about Israel-Palestine. I just briefly wanted to mention to everyone that's listening, if you have questions for our two guest speakers, please put them in the chat. We're going to do a bit more of an open Q&A at the end of Aya's remarks, and then we can conclude. But thank you again so much for participating. So the current situation in Israel-Palestine is truly a cause for a great concern for anybody paying attention. It's been bad. It seems like it's really escalating, and incidents of settler violence are increasing, and the combined actions of Israeli forces and settlers have already resulted in the deaths of nearly 100 Palestinians, including over a dozen children since the start of the year. We're fast approaching the one-year anniversary of acclaimed Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh's violent murder by IDF snipers, and there's still yet to be a transparent and accountable U.S.-led investigation to see if U.S. weapons were used in this tragic murder. And despite this pattern of gross violations of human rights, the U.S. continues to give $3.8 billion in military aid to Israel per year. And over the years, this aid has helped Israel develop one of the most advanced militaries in the world. So to help us understand this situation and how U.S. weapons are helping perpetuate the conflict, it's my honor to welcome Aya Zayada from AJP's Americans for Justice in Palestine. She's their advocacy director. She's a Palestinian-American human rights scholar, activist, advocate, and writer who maintains a track record in organizing awareness of Palestine and other crucial human rights issues. Aya has completed her master's in international human rights at the Joseph Corbell School of International Relations, And throughout her graduate experience, she specialized in Palestinian rights, resistance, and the dynamics of ethnic cleansing in Palestine. Aya, welcome.
Thanks so much, Hassan. I'm happy to be here. I'm sorry for the background noise. I have to work from a coffee shop, so just let me know if you can't hear me at any point.
We're so grateful you're here.
Thank you. In my role, I get a lot of questions on what exactly do you focus on working on Palestine and Israel from the US. And obviously we have multiple issues across the board that happen every single year. Israel is commonly causing chaos, but our biggest issue is the funding that goes to Israel. And I'm going to put it into perspective for you guys and break it down. As it stands, nearly all current US aid to Israel is military assistance. So this aid has transformed Israel's armed forces into one of the most technologically sophisticated militaries in the world. And it's helped Israel build its domestic defense industry, which now ranks as one of the top global arms exporters. The Biden administration recently announced that a new arms transfer policy, which directs the State Department to bar weapons sales to states that are more likely than not to commit human rights violations with American arms. So American arms exports account for nearly 40% of the global arms trade, and human rights restrictions on these transfers could potentially ensure that American weapons are not used to violate international law. However, these conditions have yet to be placed on Israel, unfortunately. And it's very unfortunate because Israel receives, like Hassan said, $3.8 billion in foreign military financing from the US every single year, which is more than any other state in the world. Any other state receives in the world combined. So that's around 150 billion since 1948. American foreign military financing finances upwards of 16% of Israel's total annual defense budget. So about 75% of this aid is earmarked for the purchase of American weapons, while 25% of the funds are used for the research and development of indigenous Israeli weapons. According to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, American foreign military financing amounts to an 815 million annual subsidization by US taxpayers of Israeli weapon manufacturers. So we're paying for this weaponry and this military funding as well. This annual subsidization of Israel's domestic arms industry accounts for over 13% of total American foreign military financing expenditures. So I know this is a lot of numbers, but bear with me because it's very important to understand this breakdown and what it means. So through this mechanism, the US has provided tens of billions of dollars in weapons development subsidies over the last 40 years, helping Israel establish a massive arms industry. So the US subsidized Israel's domestic arms industry with around $815 million annually, and Israel subsequently exports those subsidies arms without any transparency. So they're not traceable to governments committing grave human rights abuses, including genocide. So if the US wants to continue subsidizing Israel's arms industry, Israeli weapons exports should be subjected to the same transparency and human rights restrictions as American arms exports. If the Biden administration is serious about preventing human rights violations with American weaponry and American funding, it can't ignore the American subsidized Israeli arms exported to known human rights abusers, including Israel as a human rights abuser itself. So beyond enabling Israel's exported arms to other governments who commit human rights violations, the US also enables them to commit their own human rights violations via US taxpayer funds and US arms. And the biggest issue with this is because Israel is the only entity to receive unconditional military aid and military funding, it makes it difficult for us to trace and track whether or not our funds and arms are being utilized to violate the human rights of Palestinians on a daily basis. Like Hassan also mentioned, 2022 was noted as one of the deadliest years for Palestinians. A total of 14 Palestinians were killed just between December 8th, 2022 and January 13th, 2023. And another 117 were injured by Israeli occupation forces. Just the beginning of this year alone, in the first 2 months of this year, there was almost a Palestinian killed for every day of the first 2 months of 2023. So that kind of puts it into perspective that 2023 is also beating 2022 already in being the deadliest year for Palestinians. But taking it back to 2022, in January of 2022, so right off the bat, Omar Assad, a Palestinian American from Milwaukee, was driving to his home in the occupied West Bank of Jaliliya, where he had been spending his retirement for the past decade, and he was stopped by Israeli occupation soldiers. At 78 years old, he was bound, gagged, and blindfolded after being stopped, and then he was left to die of a heart attack. A few months later, on May 11th, Shireen Abu Akleh, a Palestinian American journalist with Al Jazeera, was shot at the entrance of a Jenin refugee camp despite wearing her press vest and being very visible as a journalist. A colleague of hers, journalist Ali Samoudi, was also shot and wounded in the shoulder, but luckily he survived. And of course, Israel was quick to deny any responsibility for the incident the very same morning, claiming that armed Palestinians had fired the shots, which was not true. And this claim was soon refuted by Israel itself. Since then, however, the Israeli version has changed several times. And beyond verbal statements from our own administration, the US has yet to fulfill a proper investigation and determine whether the arms used to kill Shireen were provided by the US. So these tragedies, unfortunately, are not the first, nor will they be the last to come from Israel until the US doubles down and holds them accountable through action as opposed to meaningless words and statements, which are the extent that the US has gone to hold Israel accountable. Last month, our C3 organization, American Muslims for Palestine, actually sent a policy memo to the State Department asking that they work to impose a comprehensive arms embargo on Israel, and that the sanctions should cover the direct and indirect supply, sale, or transfer, including transit and transshipment of all weapons, munitions, and other military and security equipment, including the provisions of training and other military and security assistance. However, we have yet to get a response. Last year, when Omar Assad was murdered, we also had his members of Congress send a letter to the State Department. We have yet to have an investigation fulfilled on that end. We've had letters sent on Shireen, we've had actions sent on Shireen, and they both have yet to receive justice. And again, this is further enabling Israel and sends a clear message to Israel that even if you kill our own citizens, we're not going to do very much, and we're just going to keep pumping money into you and untrackable money into your military. However, I do believe that we are in a better wave right now in terms of policymakers, and more policymakers are upset over this and want to make change. So in the coming weeks, I believe Representative Betty McCollum will be introducing another version of HR 2590, which is the Defending the Human Rights of Palestinian Children and Families Living Under the Israeli Military Occupation Act, which is a very, very crucial piece of legislation. And in an attempt to gain justice for Shireen and her family, a Justice for Shireen Act will also be introduced. So I urge you all to keep an eye out on both pieces, and once they're introduced, to reach out to your members of Congress and urge them to support these pieces of legislation and resolutions. And if you'd like to be more involved on congressional advocacy for Palestine, especially as a US taxpayer, be sure to follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletter, where we regularly release action alerts on issues regarding Palestine and Israel at agpaction.org, and follow us on social media. And if you'd like to be directly involved, be sure to look out for our Advocacy Week, which will be occurring in October of this year, and we'll be resuming back in person. So you'll get to meet with your members of Congress, and we'll train you on whatever issues are occurring, especially the Justice for Shireen Act and other pieces of legislation. So be sure to follow our social media to keep track of when the registration opens up.
I thank you so much. That was really comprehensive, very informative. There's a lot going on right now. And I have to say, as someone who really cares about this, it can, it can feel like things are just, continuing to backslide, and things have been bad, before. So it's not like things are, we have something that's that great to point to, but, so offering people ways that they can actually plug in and make a real difference. I will say, I've seen firsthand how, people, constituents actually getting involved, getting their voices heard can actually, change the way their member of Congress thinks. And I guess I'm wondering if you can, say maybe, a bit more about, sort of the coalition that's working on some of these actions, and maybe, yeah, I would just love to know a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. So we have a big coalition of Palestinian orgs working on this. So it's ourselves, our C3 organization, American Muslims for Palestine, IMEU, USCPR, FCNL. I mean, we have so many organizations that are on this, and I think it's very groundbreaking. I mean, we've been able to influence the policymaking space in the last 5 years alone in a way that we've never been able to. I mean, the fact that members of Congress are even able to say things like Israel's ethnically cleansing Palestinians is huge. And I think that the last 2 years, Israel has kind of told on itself with all of its violations of human rights, and more Congress and members of our policymaking spaces over the whole country becoming more proactive on this issue and wanting to do more. I mean, last year when Shireen was murdered, you saw the Senate act in a way that they've never acted before on Palestine. And that's all thanks to our coalitions. I mean, we're constantly having these conversations behind the scenes. We're hosting advocacy weeks. We're constantly releasing action alerts on this issue, making it easier for all of you to take action in a more comprehensive way. And I think what myself and probably every other coalition partner would say is we really urge you to continuously have conversations with your members of Congress, especially as a US taxpayer. I mean, your money is directly funding these atrocities, unfortunately. And there's a lot of statistics that are coming out that the more that Americans learn the truth about Israel, the more they begin to dislike it. So the more that people learn that our own taxpayer, like our own money is being injected into Israeli military and Israeli human rights violations of Palestinians, should be reason enough for us to be acting. And it starts within our, with this administration and our Congress. And I mean, at the end of the day, these legislators, they work for us. So we should be in there just as much as other Zionist organizations are, like AIPAC. But I would say we are seeing a bigger difference and a bigger impact than we've ever seen before.
That's super inspiring, and thank you. Can I bring Aisha back into the conversation too? Maybe we can all stay on camera here and have another conversation. Aisha, I just see so many. The politics are different. We have to fully understand that there is a domestic constituency in the U.S. That has a really strong interest in supporting Israel, where Saudi Arabia, a lot of people, just, for a lot of reasons, unfortunately, some of that is Islamophobia and anti-Arab sentiments. So we have to name that. But, there's also 9/11, there's Al-Qaeda, there's a lot of, things that are different. But Aisha, I guess I'm wondering, are there any lessons like through your advocacy on Yemen that might be helpful as we think about, ways to make forward progress on trying to rein in U.S. militarism with Israel? Maybe
a lot of people and educating our political leaders about what's going on. It is quite interesting because I think the similarities is access to the media. And I would say both the Palestinian and my heart goes to the Palestinians. They've been suffering for 70 years. That the fact that they have not been in the main media when anything happens to them. Same thing with Yemen. So that lack of access, because whether it's the Saudi or whether it's the Israelis, they have huge amount of money that they can influence not just the national media, but also the think tanks. that write pieces without declaring their conflict of interest. So really grassroots organizing, and also bringing, letting our leaders, political leaders, elected leaders, that we are the ones who elect them, not these, whether it's IPAC or any other lobbyist groups. And especially, I'm actually more now hopeful and optimistic, especially with young people who are very interested in social justice. There was a report, a survey of Americans that was released this week, or actually yesterday, that showed about 48% of Americans think that Israel is an apartheid state. This is something that we wouldn't have heard before, but that is due to the advocacy work, due to people hearing about it, and politicians, they care about votes. And if we can tell them, if you're going to be acting in a way that's against our interest, against our principles, then we're not sending you to the office. They will listen. And we've learned from the Yemen work. I mean, most of us are volunteers at this kind of work. Yet we were working against Saudi and Emiratis with so much money and so much lobbying. And I know the Israeli lobby is also very powerful. But it is getting the elected people to know that our voices need to be heard.
It's so powerful, and you both have really led the way in so many of these things. So thank you, really. There's a question in the chat here. So, in what ways do you think normalization of Iran and Saudi Arabia, that was a deal brokered by China just a few weeks ago, and Bashar al-Assad and Saudi Arabia, coming together, that was brokered by China. We'll see where that goes. How is that going to affect militarism or security in the region? And it's really just this, really we're at a corner of history that we've never been at with this China brokered Saudi-Iran deal. And so much is just moving so quickly here. It seems like Congress and the administration haven't really caught up with this new paradigm of a multipolar world. The global South is kind of, seems like they're embracing that. And the U.S. is still kind of clinging to, U.S. primacy and hegemony around the Middle East and really beyond. So I guess I'm wondering if you both could kind of speak to how these, this recent breakthrough within diplomacy in the Arab states is really affecting the issues that you're working on. Maybe I know, Aisha, if you want to start off.
Sure. Actually, we're very delighted that the Saudis and the Iranians are talking, because that reduces the tension in the region. So any effort to reduce tension is welcome for any person who's interested in peace and stability in the region. Would be very delighted by that. So we're very happy. We've seen also, a Saudi delegation visit Sana'a, which is also very positive. Again, it's unfortunate what's happening in Sudan now, but as more countries in the region speak to one another, I think it's very positive. I was stunned, surprised this morning, but also not kind of surprised when the Archbishop said that the U.S. media, the U.S. administration presented the deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia that was brokered by the Chinese in a negative way, which is true. And so I don't understand why anyone would not be happy with countries who've been, destabilizing the region. Why they wouldn't be happy with them talking to one another and, bringing peace to the region. So I think they to listen to the needs of the people, the voices in the region that are saying, we don't want any more wars. We want to, we want to live with one another. And the US should stop from derailing any peace process in the region.
That's so important, Aisha. And Aya, what are you thinking about these developments?
Well, I can't speak specifically to that. I can speak specifically, so for more on our side with Israel, there's been a lot of deals brokered between the UAE and Israel, Bahrain and Israel, and they've been brokered by the United States. And these kinds of deals have been made for decades now, where Palestinians aren't included in the conversation. So we don't welcome those kinds of deals, because unfortunately they escalate things on a higher level and they further leave Palestinians out of the conversation. What we need is for the United States to stop funding Israel, period. We don't need other superpowers in the region to be buddies with Israel. And at the end of the day, these deals that are made are for the sake of the United States to increase its security in the region, not to protect Palestinians or to develop Palestinian human rights. So I think there's like differences there. Obviously, anything that actually de-escalates, we welcome. But and with our specific issue, Palestinians are constantly left out, and they've been left out since the creation of Israel. So it's a bit different.
Can I make a comment here? I hope I'm not stepping
No, go ahead.
yeah. The US has been presumably brokering peace between the Israeli and the Palestinian for as many years as I remember. And US has never been an honest broker. It's actually been part of the conflict. And we see that with Yemen, the US is part of the conflict and cannot be an honest broker. And I always use, unfortunately, the issue, the case of Palestine is, people who are part of the conflict cannot be mediators. And the US has taken this role to be a mediator, but only to strengthen Israelis over the Palestinians. And these, I don't even call them peace deals between whether UAE or Bahrain. These countries were never at war with Israel, so there is really nothing to mediate peace between them.
Exactly, that's a really good point. And that's why we're so stuck on ending military aid to Israel. Obviously, our first step is to condition it because that's the closest we can get. But ideally, we would like to end it fully. But you're right, the United States has not been an honest broker, and if anything, it has blood on its hands. It has Palestinian blood on its hands, and it has been the sole enabler of what's been happening to the Palestinians. I mean, it's enabling settler colonialism. It's enabling ethnic cleansing. It's enabling religious persecution of Palestinians every single year. And so I think that the biggest thing to note for this year is how Israel doesn't even respect the United States. So it makes no sense. Why are we continuing to fund a government that very clearly said, so Prime Minister Netanyahu and the IDF's chief of staff or something, chief sergeant, both said that they do not need the United States. They don't respect us. They don't respect our rules. They don't respect our laws. And they very clearly stated that they don't need us. So why are we continuing to pour taxpayer money into a government entity that not only doesn't respect us as a government and as its biggest ally, but it also doesn't respect the human rights of the Palestinian people and others within the region, of course.
Thank you both for that. So important, really. Now, it's to me, it seems like the U.S. is just so focused on, just maintaining its primacy in the region. It's trying to have this anti-Iran, anti-Palestinian coalition of Arab states that hang together. And I am, hopeful with some of this new diplomatic progress that we're going to have a more robust conversation about what security actually means. To me, security is Iran and Saudi Arabia not trying to attack each other. That's so important. So this is really just such a wonderful conversation and really a timely conversation, both with what's happening in Palestine and what's happening in Yemen right now. I did want to mention one thing that we're tracking at FCNL is a 502B resolution of the Foreign Assistance Act. Now, Senator Murphy and Mike Lee, they've introduced SRES 109 as the bill number, and it's never been used before in this way. They're going to force a vote on this to, one, investigate Saudi Arabia's human rights abuses, not just in Yemen, but with Jamal Khashoggi, with dissidents at home and abroad. And I think that's going to be a very important investigation. And then that opens up the door to more resolutions that can be fast tracked to the Senate floor to actually restrict aid, condition aid, or or halt it altogether. So I think this is a very interesting and important development. And if this precedent gets set, if we actually investigate Saudi Arabia's human rights abuses, I think it opens up the door to a lot more. And that's going to raise the expectations for what's possible, on Israel-Palestine, because, we need a full, transparent accounting of the human rights violations. And we need to open up the door, not just for messaging bills and letters, but we need votes on the Senate floor so we can actually debate this in public, and that democracy can kind of play out, where if you vote against, supporting Palestinian human rights, you're going to hear from some constituents. So that's what I'd like to see going forward. There's really, so much more we could say. I did want to flag that there's another message in the chat for Aisha. Please provide a link or further information about the recent poll you cited. I would love to see that too. I think that's really important. And I don't know if you have it available. Maybe we can follow up with it in an email.
Yeah, I can send an email to you, Hassan.
Okay. Well, thank you. Rebecca, we just have a few minutes left. I'm wondering if maybe I could just pass it to both of you for a final word for our audience, if that's all right. Maybe starting with you, Aya, and thank you again for everything.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I just think this is a very important conversation. I mean, we're in a very pivotal time right now. The last 2 years, like I said earlier, Israel has kind of told on itself. And I mean, things have been escalating a lot more quickly. And we, as a Palestinian myself, and as somebody within the movement, I'm very frustrated with the US response and continuous enablement of Israel, despite the fact that the US itself is not being respected by the Israeli government. Because the Palestinians are constantly under the threat of displacement, under the threat of death for no reason, and it's just going to keep getting worse until we hold them accountable. And the U.S. has the biggest responsibility to be holding Israel accountable, given the amount of money that we fund them. And as a Palestinian, as a taxpayer, as an American, I demand them to act differently. And I would hope that everybody tuning in, and Americans in general, that the more you learn, that you stay in touch with the issue, and you urge your members of Congress, and like we said earlier, have a bigger voice, because at the end of the day, we hire these policymakers and they should be hearing from us. So I hope to see you all join us for our Advocacy Week in October.
I'll be there. Thank you, Aya, so much. And Aisha, give us the last word.
Yeah, I want to say that advocacy works, that our voices count, that when I started working on the Yemen issue, I felt very lonely, as I was thinking that I'm the only one. And we were, again, working against big money. But things worked because of people like you taking action, writing letters, making phone calls, educating others. Even if you speak to one person after this and tell them about what you've learned, that's what we need. We need more people to know about what's going on. We need justice. We need justice for everyone. Justice for people in Palestine, for people in Yemen, for people in the US who have suffered so much injustices. So if we all can stand for justice everywhere, I think we will all succeed.
Well said. Aisha, thank you so much. And thank you to Rebecca for all the back end work and making sure that the tech issues remain at bay. But anyway, have a good rest of your ecumenical advocacy days, and thank you for joining us today.